Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Donkey Kong Country 3. In the last one we finished off Cramped Forest, and now we moved on to World 3 Cotton Top Cove. Meet Blue. Hello there, Kongs. How are you? My name is Blue. Pleased to meet you. What's that red circle on the counter? It's nothing of importance. Okay, bye. We'll talk to him again later. For now, we want to come up here immediately to Bounty Bay for another hidden banana bird. By and large, if you're looking for the ones that are just hidden in the world, not through the Brothers Bear side quests, just look for any beaches or things that look relatively out of place in the world map. Or the world maps individually, rather. Because I'd say by and large, every single sub-world has one, but there's also the main, like, 5 or 6 hidden just in the world map. But now it's time for our next major level. This is Baz's Blockade. I believe this is the first level in the game without a warp barrel. I think from World 3 onwards, they tend to place those more sparingly, if not completely ignore them. It's also our first water level outright, and we've swum before in the game because there's a surprising amount of water in this game compared to some of the other ones. With that said, the fully underwater levels play almost exactly identical to how they did in Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, to the point where you can also find End Guard in most of these levels. But I find in this game they try to be a bit more intense with the levels, and both in terms of their main mechanics, but also because the music's a lot more eerie. It's much closer to, say, an Echo the Dolphin soundtrack than the general relaxing nature of the Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2 water music. With that said, the main mechanic of Baz's Blockade, or Bazza, is the namesake enemy, which are little barracuda guys that just move in straight lines. That's all they do. They just move in straight lines. You have to avoid them. Sometimes what the Donkey Kong Country games classify as a level mechanic is more just closer to a unique enemy for the level. And that's valid to do for that, because, hell, I'm a Mega Man fan, and one of the things that makes Mega Man stages unique isn't just the aesthetics, or maybe the per-level mechanic, it's the enemies that are also unique for every level. But having them just be enemies that move straight forward, and that being your mechanic, feels a little kind of bare for a Donkey Kong Country game, given what some of the mechanics were in the earlier games. Then again, making water levels engaging can be hard, depending on what you're doing. Like, the music's a good part to help with that, yes, but also, how many water levels in a platformer like this, especially from back when, have super engaging mechanics? I can't think of too many. Hell, even today, they kind of tend to suffer a little bit. Like, games that are entirely water-themed can work. For instance, Abzu was really fun. Well, not fun, it was very interesting. Pretty. Subnautica, not exactly my thing, but it's cool. Sometimes working with this stuff is hard. That said, it's also one levels you have to kind of backtrack for in order to get one of the bonus barrels, because now that we have On Guard, we want to head back up to the top left of the section we were just in and just charge through the bazas in order to reach the next bonus barrel. Backtracking is very uncommon in this game, unless you actively miss and need to either backtrack through a level to get back to where you missed a bonus, or miss a bonus period. By and large, you can get through the levels without having to do much of that, period. And I like that, but makes the cases where they actively make you have to backtrack stand out a little bit. Because usually you can just progress straight through and you won't have to miss anything. Poor On Guard, though. If I'm recalling correctly, this is like either the third or second to last level he's in. Doesn't get much use in this game compared to a lot of the other animal buddies. Mind you, I feel in general, compared to Donkey Kong Country 2, and especially Donkey Kong Country 1, I feel the animal buddies are not as emphasized this time around, as they're not randomly placed throughout various levels as a bonus for you to find. They're a main mechanic. And while Donkey Kong Country 2 did that as well, I feel they either use their abilities in general better in that game, or they're placed more regularly. I'd say maybe one level per world uses one of them in this game, and even then, how much they use them depends on the level. With that said, now we're on to Rocket Barrel Ride. This stage is a little bit different in that it introduces a new type of barrel to, I think, the game's period, called a rocket barrel. It's more or less a launcher barrel, only you move in a direction before being shot out of it. The big puzzle here is figuring out how to get to the end using them, because we have a couple of different altitudes and layers working here. If you ever see a little section going behind the waterfalls, that counts as a different area. And I should note that it's very important to note that, because if you mess things up with that, you can fall behind the main platforms and fall to your death by just following the waterfalls. Be careful with that. It's a little easy to do. Love the music track here. This is a really calming track. Speaking of music, by the way, the game does have a sound test. I forget if Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2 had that. But that said, the way you access it's a little atypical for the era. You have to go to the file select screen. And while you're on that, highlight a menu that you highlight the file you haven't put anything into yet, and then press LRR, LRR, LR, LR for the shoulder buttons, and then enter the name of the file as music, and I'll take you right there, and then you can just listen away. That's by and large how most of the game's cheat codes are handled. It's usually do some button combination on the file select screen, then enter the name of the file as something very particular. And hey, it works there. There's a surprising amount of cheat codes in this game from memory, but they are a little awkward to enter. Like, let me see if I can get some of them up real quick, just about like going on game facts. You can give yourself 50 lives to start by doing that same LRR, LRR, LRLR intro. In fact, that's usually what you have to do for a cheat code. That basically puts you in cheat mode. If you enter lives as your name, you get 50 lives. You can enter a save to automatically save your progress, I believe, after clearing a level, which is oddly forward-thinking for them. You can get slightly different-looking bonus games by entering Mary to make them look like Christmas. There's color switching, which I believe switches the colors between Kitty and Dixie or something like that. Same usual intro, then press enter the name as color. You can actively listen to the game over music by, on the game over screen, pressing LR, A, B, X, and Y in that order. You can get 100% in the game real quick by doing the LR, LRR, blah, 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 and entering the name screen as water, and enter the first waterfall to the left of the game to get, like, 85 bonus coins, everything you more or less need to clear the game 100%, so you can just go straight to the end game, I think, at that point, barring maybe the final boss. And perhaps most famously, there's even 2 harder difficulties of the game you can do by using the cheat mode. There is harder mode and toughest mode. The way you do that is by doing the usual LR, LR, blah, 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 blah thing. And then at the file screen, either entering your name as harder, spelled H-A-R-D-R, or toughest, spelled T-U-F-S-T. What these do is they remove a certain amount of continue or DK barrels from the game stages to make the game, well, harder. For instance, harder removes 29 of the DK barrels throughout the game. And for beating the game in that mode, you actually get a higher end total completion of 104% versus the 103 in the main game. And for toughest, all the halfway barrels and more or less all but like 4 DK barrels are removed from the game stages. So they do make the game harder. But for beating the game on toughest mode, you do get an end total of 105% rather than the 103 again we're going to see at the end of the game. So theoretically, this technically isn't a 100% run because I don't go for 105%. But frankly, I don't like this game enough to go do that. And admittedly, that's always been a little bit of an iffy thing when it comes to LPs, is 100%ing. And, like, I try to always do what I would value as 100% in every LP I do, nowadays at least. Earlier on, not so much the case. Hell, there's a reason there's 3 LPs of Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission each on this channel. Just because of how my methodology evolved over the years. But for some games, there's always going to be another way you could technically play it that will also be considered 100%. For instance, one that comes to mind is Final Fantasy VII. I did every side quest when I did that with Kenny, but I didn't master every materia, and therefore, by some methods, I didn't get 100%. It's always iffy, and I just try to go with what's the general consensus for 100% for a lot of games nowadays. Unless there's a personal attachment that makes me want to do a little bit up and beyond. Like, ultimately, what games I do that for, depends. Like, if I ever get to, say, Command Mission, I'm not sure if I'll do the Ninetales boss fights, but, say, Final Fantasy X, I might do Dark Aeons, not sure yet. With that, now we're moving on to Creeping Clasps. This level's a little bit twofold in its main mechanic, in that it's the return to the aesthetic from the first levels in the game, of course. The big thing we're avoiding is Clasp, which is a living barrel who likes to climb on the ropes. Bumping into him, I don't believe outright hurts you. If it doesn't, rather, it just bumps you into the water where that fish awaits us. Nibbla down there works a bit like Boss Bass or Big Bertha from the Mario games, and that they'll take a hearty chomp out of you. Thankfully, it's not instant kill, but I suppose in some ways it is because it does take out the Kong you're currently in control of just because of the one hit point wonder nature of these games. I do feel that's probably the thing that the Donkey Kong Country Returns games improved on this formula the most with, is giving the Kongs more than one hit point each. At least if you were playing in such a way where you could have more than one health point in one Kong. Because that really goes a long way to make the game feel more approachable. And admittedly, they do use that extra hit point to their advantage in those games because, oh boy, they get some complex levels in there. The ropes do get a little bit more cluttered and clustered the further we get into the level, but as long as you're generally jumping off of them and hovering with Dixie, you can easily avoid a lot of the clasps. Plus, they all patrol very specific areas, so you don't need to worry about them, say, chasing you down to the end of the rope. Not on this level, at least. That's a different variation of them later on that does that. Take your time with this particular bonus, though, because it's very easy to overpace yourself and just get hit by one of these clasps, and then you lose the bonus game, and then you just get sad because you have to go back to that bonus barrel, and no one wants to do that. Also, seeing we get the end reminds me, I would say in general, getting the Kong letters in this game might be the easiest out of the trilogy, as by and large. They're probably the most in the way in this game, because DKC 1 and 2 could be a little tricky where they hide them sometimes with either the routing you need to get to grab them all or things like that. In this game, there's not many cases where there's, say, like an auto-scroller that causes you to miss them. It's really straightforward in this one, because that, again, live's pretty easy to get here. Still easy to lose them in some cases, but we'll cover that more as we progress through. Because I'd say after I can't remember the name of this world all of a sudden. Something Top Cove is where the difficulty starts to spike up. With that said, now we're on to the third type of minigame here with Swanky, Endurance. It's just whoever misses a shot first. That can take a while. It might not take long at all. It all depends on how you or Cranky's AI feels like being. But now we're on to the next level. This is Tracker Barrel Trek. The main mechanic with this particular level is tracker barrels. Tracker barrels are, I think, new to this game, period. The way they work is the moment you enter them, you more or less control them on a left-to-right basis, and they'll track beneath you as long as you've entered them. You gotta use that to avoid enemies, grab items, whatever you need to do, really. And I wish they were used more often, honestly. I think they could be a really interesting mechanic, but this is, I think, the only level that uses them to any real extent. And I get wanting every level to maybe have its own identity, sort of, but I feel sometimes games like this get a little carried away with having a mechanic for every stage. And that's not to say that there aren't games that don't do that nowadays, but I feel especially platformers that were getting experimental in the 90s, and even today, are probably the worst cases of that. Also, really weirdly hidden bonuses. By and large, I think every bonus in this particular stage is just hidden slightly off-screen. Need to know it's there by just combing the stage for it. Admittedly, that has been a tradition since DKC 1, because DKC 1's bonuses were almost always the ones just, like, hidden in this particular wall that you need to know you need a barrel for, which there's almost no way you're going to know that on most playthroughs without just looking for it. With that said, this stage also is one of the more tough-to-nab DK coins in the game, because I think this is one of the only cases in the game where the barrel will not respawn to take out coin unless you replay the level if you mess up. So you gotta get it down in one shot, and not helping things is that you need to be pretty precise with it, because you only get the barrel for getting the DK coin, that you need to get the DK coin rather, if you make it to the end of the stage with Ellie. And you can completely ignore Ellie, but for 100% you obviously don't want to. Thankfully, helping things is that you can suck water from the waterfall, like you could from the rivers and lakes in the other stage, to use as a projectile with her. I forget if it's the same controls to do that here. I forget if, say, sucking water out of the lakes was like down and a button, whereas this is up and a button. But by and large, once you have the water in you after you figured it out, it controls the exact same. And hey, it's a guaranteed projectile against enemies. I'll take that. Just because of my bias in platforming to preferring things like Mega Man, I will always prefer having a projectile to take out enemies compared to jumping on them. Jumping on them's classic, but there's times where it just makes me a-scared, and I don't like being a-scared in a platformer. I do appreciate that Ellie has different animations for whether or not you're sucking in the water out of the waterfall that's in front of you or behind you, though. Lesser games probably would have just made one animation for both, and not cared. You need to be a bit careful with that particular buzz back there, by the way, because you need to actively aim up and fire the water in order to hit it, otherwise you're just gonna miss. And missing there is rough, because you're just gonna take a hit, potentially lose Ellie, which is bad because you're so close to the end of the stage at this point. Not to mention, you're also pretty close to the DK coin. Alright, so this one's rough because you need to time things pretty precisely. You need to throw the barrel up there and run across, get to the point where you can see it bounce off the screen, and then have it hit the coin while you're standing on top of it. The problem there is that the collision in timing is a little precise, because there's times where the barrel will just bounce off the top of that platform. There's times where it'll roll too fast or too slow depending on where you throw it. It can be tough to time. That's one of the harder ones to get, and thank God I got it first try. With that, now we're on to probably one of the more stressful levels in the game. This is Fish Food Frenzy. The main mechanic with this particular stage is that Nibla fish we saw a couple stages ago, but now he's blue. But the name is Fish Food Frenzy for a reason. We gotta feed Nibla throughout the level in order to keep him placated. If you feed him the little clownfishes, he stays blue and generally happy. The longer he is without food, he turns to, I think it's purple, then pink, then red. If he turns red, he'll attack whichever Kong you're in control of, and at that point, you've just lost that Kong. If you feed him one of the little sea urchin enemies, though, he automatically regresses a single stage towards the pink. So you gotta be careful and fast here. Which is a very dangerous combination to try to be. Thankfully, they place the fish at such a good rhythm that it's pretty easy to keep him fed and not angry at you, but there's times where they deliberately mess with you by placing a lot of the sea urchins in a row, or in a way where you need to take your time and potentially lose Nibla timer anyway. So you need to make sure you're progressing at a good pace, but also keeping in mind what's around you, and that wouldn't be too bad in a normal platforming level, but I think because this is also a swimming level, it gets a little bit elevated, because you need to keep in mind not only your X coordinate, but your Y coordinate always, because there might be a fish that you might miss just because you weren't at the right position at the right point. Because Nibla does home in on the enemy slightly, but because he also lags behind you a little bit, especially when you're just mashing the button to run fast, it's easy for you to accidentally guide him into something you didn't mean to. And because of that, this level can be rough. I'd say in general, this game does a good job of placing out its DK barrels and checkpoints to the point where it doesn't make it super annoying when you keep on dying, but you still want to make sure you take your time with these levels when you don't have a time limit actively placed on you, so that you can pace yourself right. Because I feel that is the sort of mentality for the Donkey Kong Country games. They are meant to be a slower, more methodical platformer compared to, say, Sonic, Mega Man, or even Mario, just because they want you to search around the levels for the extra goodies. But between me liking my LPs to go at a certain pace and have a good flow to them, and the Metroid in me telling me to also do things fast, but also do them well, that becomes a bit of a problem for me on a personal level, at least. Because even when I play games normally, I like to play the stages as quickly but efficiently as I can. Like when I casually play Shovel Knight, I try to beat that game as fast as possible, while also getting as many of the stages and items done along the way, and that's not always the easiest thing to do. Gotta really take your time here, by the way, because all those urchins are enough to take Nibla down to the pink zone. We also kind of want to do that because we want to take care of that urchin to get up here to this bonus room, which I don't like that they hide one behind that, basically requiring you maybe take a hit depending on what stage your nibble is already at. That's a little... But then again, as I've aged, I find in general a lot of Rarewares games, well, they're classics in their own right, have a lot of decisions in them in terms of some game design or creative ideas. And I think it's just because as I've gotten older, I don't like collectathons in general. Like, I love Mario Odyssey, but I don't like, say, Mario Sunshine as much anymore outside of its core platforming. I don't like Mario 64 that much anymore. Games that make me go all over the place like this need to be a very specific thing nowadays for them to make my brain produce the good chemicals. Like, going for everything in a Yakuza game feels great. Going for, like, 6 different collectibles because I need to get these to get that type of collectible to beat the game, not the biggest fan of that anymore. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 5, we're going to be taking out the boss of this world before heading on over to the next world. See you guys then.